In this episode, we'll explore 3 terrifying stories where people lost their lives while trying to snap selfies with deadly wild animals. From a young man in the U.S. who came face to face with a hostile bear, to an Indian individual who unlawfully entered a lion's den at a zoo, all in pursuit of the perfect photo. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps us bring you more gripping documentaries like this one. Now, let's dive in. But first, we begin with the story of Jessica. On July 15, 2014, just outside of Houston, Texas, a private collection of exotic animals would become the backdrop of one of the most gruesome tiger attacks in recent American history. Jessica Martinez and her longtime friend Amy Chen, both 23, had set out for a weekend full of excitement, but what awaited them was a nightmare no one could have predicted. In the early 2000s, private ownership of exotic animals had surged throughout Texas. By 2014, more tigers lived in private captivity within the state than in the wilds of India. Over 3,000 big cats residing in private backyards, makeshift enclosures, and unregulated sanctuaries. A dangerous mixture of lax legal oversight and wealthy collectors created conditions experts had warned about repeatedly. Jessica and Amy had been close since their teenage years in a Houston suburb. Now working together as dental assistants at the same clinic, they spent nearly every weekend chasing new experiences. Jessica's iPhone 5S was packed with photos from hikes, beach visits, and small festivals. Their trip to Thompson's Wild Wonders, a facility branding itself as a sanctuary for exotic wildlife, was arranged thanks to Amy's cousin, Mike, who worked as one of the caretakers. The property was owned by David Thompson, a wealthy oil industry veteran who began collecting exotic animals in 2008. His private zoo covered 15 acres of land and housed 7 tigers, 4 lions, and several other dangerous species. Despite their size and strength, these animals were held in cages barely meeting the most basic legal standards. Mike Wilson, Amy's cousin, was 35 years old and had been working at the facility for 3 years, despite having no academic training in animal behavior or zoology. Like many employees at private wildlife compounds, their knowledge came solely from on-the-job experience. Thompson provided generous compensation and on-site housing, which made the job appealing to people despite the considerable risks involved. Jessica and Amy arrived at approximately 4:30 p.m. as the sweltering southern Texas sun started to ease up. The entrance to the compound was unimpressive, just a chain-link gate with a sun-faded sign warning visitors to keep out. The most prized animal in the collection was Raja, an enormous male Bengal tiger, 8 years old, that Thompson had bought as a cub from an exotic animal dealer in Oklahoma who was offloading inventory due to money problems. The moment Raja emerged from his concrete shelter, both girls gasped. Weighing more than 500 pounds, his appearance was mesmerizing. Tigers are apex predators by design. Their bite strength surpasses 1,000 pounds per square inch, enough to snap a buffalo's spine in one bite. Their claws can crush bones with a single strike, and their retractable claws can grow up to 4 inches long. And perhaps most crucially, even those raised in captivity never lose the innate predatory instincts embedded in their DNA. 5 feet from the enclosure, Raja's agility and skill, leaping into the air to snatch the meat mid-flight, prompted both women to lift their phones in awe, eager to record the experience. Then, the unthinkable happened. As Mike concentrated on feeding the tigers, he didn't see Jessica slowly edging closer to the fencing, angling her phone for what she hoped would be the perfect selfie. Unconsciously, she leaned in, trying to frame the shot better. Amy,
briefly distracted by a loud roar from another cage, turned her gaze elsewhere. Mike had observed visitors ignore the rules before, crossing marked lines or pushing limits without realizing the danger. When Raja's focus shifted from the food to Jessica, Mike initially assumed it was harmless curiosity. Tigers often fixate on sudden movement. But then Jessica stepped closer, within 3 feet of the fence. That short distance was enough to activate Raja's killer instincts. Raja launched. The impact of his leap struck the weakened fence hard. Years of wear from the Texas climate had deteriorated the structure, and the metal mesh gave way at a stress point. His immense paw surged through a widening gap, claws digging deep into Jessica's shoulder, pulling her toward the breach. As the tiger forced his head and upper body through the hole, the cage structure collapsed further. Everything unfolded in seconds. By 5:20 p.m., barely 5 minutes after feeding started, Raja clamped his jaws onto Jessica's upper torso. Her shoulder and collarbone were crushed in an instant. His claws ripped into her skin and muscles, dragging her in. Mike yelled, trying to throw extra meat at the tiger to distract him, but Raja's attention was locked. He was in full hunting mode. Amy screamed and tried to pull Jessica away, but it was hopeless. The tiger's power dwarfed any human effort. With shaking fingers, Amy managed to call 911 at 5:24 p.m. But being in such a remote location, help was still 20 minutes out. Mike did what he could to keep Raja at bay, but by that point, Jessica's body had already been dragged violently against the fence. When emergency crews reached the compound at 5:44 p.m., Jessica had been unconscious for several minutes. The blood loss and injuries were overwhelming, beyond survival. The official investigation found numerous critical failures. Maintenance records for the fence didn't exist. The chute used for feeding broke multiple safety standards. Visitor distance guidelines were poorly enforced. Worse still, Thompson's liability insurance had expired 3 months earlier, and the required annual safety inspections had not taken place for over a year. Raja was euthanized following the attack, despite protests from several animal welfare organizations. The tragedy sparked widespread debate about private ownership of exotic animals in Texas. The facility was permanently shut down, and the remaining animals were transferred to properly regulated sanctuaries. Amy Chen became an outspoken advocate for reform. She even testified before Texas lawmakers to push for stronger oversight and stricter laws. Mike Wilson left the exotic animal world for good. The informal, relaxed culture of private animal facilities had lulled everyone into a false sense of safety, one that cost Jessica her life. But her story is just the beginning. Up next, we travel to the wild terrain of Alaska, where a group of friends would find out that making fun of danger can quickly turn into a nightmare.
July 2018. Denali National Park, Alaska. 3 college friends, Ethan, Marcus, and Troy, had been planning their trip to Alaska for months. Recent graduates from the University of Washington, they were celebrating their last summer together before starting full-time jobs. Ethan was the outdoorsy one, always seeking thrills. Marcus, the cautious and analytical type, often served as the voice of reason. Troy was the joker, charismatic, bold, and obsessed with going viral. Their destination was a remote ridge inside Denali Park, famous for its sweeping views and wild bear activity. Although known as a hotspot for grizzlies and black bears, the ridge had also become a semi-popular destination for thrill seekers hoping to get a selfie with wildlife in the backdrop. Rangers had posted warnings throughout the area. Do not approach wildlife. Stay 300 feet away from bears. But social media posts had painted a different picture. People had been getting closer and walking away unscathed. For Ethan and Troy,
The allure of a perfect Instagram photo outweighed the risk. Marcus remained uneasy, but joined his friends regardless. They arrived on July 23rd, pitched their tent at the edge of a cleared zone, and planned to spend 2 nights exploring. That afternoon, they hiked deeper into the valley, where bear sightings were frequent. At 3:40 p.m., about 2 miles into the trail, they spotted a grizzly in the distance. It was about 120 yards away, slowly lumbering across a ridge above them. Troy immediately pulled out his phone. "Let's get closer," he said. Ethan hesitated briefly, then agreed. Marcus refused, warning that they were already too close. "You can zoom in," he insisted, but the others laughed him off. Over the next 15 minutes, Ethan and Troy crept closer, crouching behind boulders, snapping pictures as the bear continued moving slowly. At about 70 yards, the animal suddenly paused. Troy, never one to resist a stunt, stood up and spread his arms, shouting, "Yo, big guy, smile for the camera." Then he started recording a video, with the bear square in the frame. That was the moment everything changed. The grizzly froze, locking eyes with Troy. In an instant, the animal shifted from passive to alert. Grizzlies are notoriously unpredictable. One second they seem indifferent, the next they become ballistic. Without warning, the bear charged. Troy yelled and turned to run. Ethan screamed, "Don't run!" but panic had already taken over. The bear covered the first 50 yards in less than 4 seconds. Marcus, who had been hiding further back, ducked behind a tree, heart pounding, paralyzed by fear, clutching his phone but unable to call for help.
After a minute that felt like an eternity, the bear stopped. Perhaps overwhelmed by the pepper spray lingering in the air or disinterested in continuing, it slowly retreated, disappearing into the trees. Marcus finally dialed 911. Help wouldn't arrive for over 90 minutes due to the remoteness of the site. By the time rescue crews reached the scene, Troy was already gone. His injuries had been catastrophic. Ethan was barely conscious, suffering massive blood loss and shock. He was airlifted to Anchorage, where he spent 3 weeks in intensive care and required multiple surgeries to save his legs. The viral video from Troy's phone, capturing the bear's charge in the initial seconds of the attack, spread like wildfire across the internet. But instead of admiration, it sparked outrage. Viewers criticized the recklessness, the arrogance, and the disturbing trend of putting personal safety second to social media fame. Park officials used the incident to reinforce strict policies around wildlife encounters. Denali Park increased patrols and placed additional signage, but the core issue remained. Too many people underestimate the danger posed by wild animals. Troy's death became part of ranger safety briefings and a chilling reminder for future visitors. Ethan never returned to hiking. He withdrew from his job offer and struggled for over a year with PTSD. Marcus eventually gave the eulogy at Troy's funeral, his voice shaking as he admitted he still heard the screams in his sleep. But even that wasn't the last time someone ignored the rules for a photo opportunity. In our final story, we visit a zoo in India, where a man, driven by alcohol and delusions of bravery, decided to climb into a lion's enclosure, with a deadly result. September 2019, Hyderabad, India. 33-year-old Siva Kumar had been drinking heavily for most of the afternoon. Local witnesses would later testify that he'd consumed several bottles of strong beer near the Nehru Zoological Park, a popular destination on the outskirts of the city. It was around 5 p.m. when Siva, now visibly intoxicated, made a sudden decision that would horrify everyone watching. He climbed over the protective barrier surrounding the lion enclosure. Several visitors shouted in alarm, and some rushed to alert the zoo staff, but Siva didn't seem concerned. He stumbled across the grass, waving his arms at the lions and shouting something incoherent.
onlookers began filming. At first, the two lions in the enclosure, one male, one female, stood motionless, confused by the man's presence. Siva continued approaching, laughing, yelling, and gesturing like he was putting on a performance. It almost seemed like a prank. Some people even laughed nervously, thinking it might be staged. But within seconds, the atmosphere shifted. The male lion began moving toward Siva, slow and deliberate, its body low to the ground. The laughter stopped. Panic rippled through the crowd as they screamed at Siva to get out. He turned to look at the lion and raised his hands as if to say, "Calm down." Then he sat down and tried to pose.
In a powerful bound, it crossed the space between them and pounced, knocking Siva flat. Screams erupted. Blood appeared almost instantly as the lion bit into his shoulder, then his neck. The female lion remained back, watching as the male asserted control over what it saw as a trespasser in its territory. Zoo staff arrived within 60 seconds, shouting and banging on the enclosure walls, trying to distract the animal. But lions, once engaged, are incredibly difficult to deter. A zookeeper fired a tranquilizer dart, but it would take minutes to act, far too long. Siva's body was limp within moments. The lion dragged him a few feet away and stood over him until the tranquilizer finally kicked in. By the time zoo officials recovered the body, Siva was pronounced dead at the scene. His injuries were too severe. A coroner later revealed that he likely died within the first 20 seconds of the attack. The entire event was captured on multiple cell phones. The footage showed a man who believed he could walk into a predator's cage and come out alive. Some speculated that his intoxication had given him a false sense of invincibility. Others believed he was seeking attention, a stunt for fame or social media. But regardless of intent, the result was the same: a needless and horrifying death. The zoo faced harsh public scrutiny, despite the fact that all protective measures had been in place. Barriers, warning signs, and cameras had all functioned as designed. But human behavior, unpredictable and often irrational, had bypassed every layer of safety. Authorities later installed higher fences and began enforcing alcohol checks at entrances on weekends. In the months following, animal experts used the tragedy to remind the public, wild animals are not actors in a show. They're not props, they do not follow scripts, and they do not care about your intentions. To them, you are either a threat, a curiosity, or prey. Siva Kumar's story was soon overshadowed by viral debates, internet jokes, and reaction videos. But in Hyderabad, his death remained a brutal warning, etched into the memory of every witness who saw him cross that barrier. And yet, even this wasn't the final cautionary tale. In 2021, deep in South Africa's Limpopo province, a tourist on safari attempted something shockingly familiar: taking a selfie with a wild hippo. What followed was swift, tragic, and all too preventable. The hippo was grazing near the water's edge, a massive bull with scars on his side and thick folds of mud-caked skin. Tourists had been warned repeatedly not to leave the vehicle. Hippos, despite their comical appearance, are among the deadliest animals in Africa. They are highly territorial, aggressive, and capable of running faster than most people expect. But the 29-year-old tourist, a man from Belgium, had other ideas. He stepped quietly out of the safari jeep, smartphone in hand. The guide shouted at him immediately, but he waved the warning off, determined to get the shot. He crouched down near a thicket, adjusting the angle for his selfie, capturing the hippo in the background with its mouth partially open. That's when the animal noticed him.
With no warning, the hippo charged, its massive jaws wide open, emitting a deep roar that startled even the other tourists. The man didn't have time to run.
The hippo closed the distance in seconds, knocking him over and biting down with enough force to crush bones. The scene was over almost as quickly as it began. The guide and others tried to intervene, banging on metal bars and throwing rocks, but it was too late. By the time they managed to scare the animal away, the man was unrecognizable. He died before emergency services could reach the remote area. His phone was recovered later, intact. The final photo showed the hippo in mid-step, just before the charge. A moment frozen in time, capturing the precise instant where a playful idea turned fatal. In the aftermath, local authorities and wildlife conservationists issued new guidelines. Tour companies were urged to emphasize not only rules, but the reasons behind them. Emotional distance from animals, especially in the age of social media, had blurred the line between entertainment and danger. What was once respected as nature had become a backdrop for likes and views. But nature doesn't play along. The deaths of these individuals weren't just tragic accidents. They were the consequences of a growing belief that life is a stage and that even wild creatures can be tamed by the lens. The reality is far more unforgiving. Each story shares the same underlying theme, a fascination with the wild mixed with a desire to capture something extraordinary. But when that desire overrides caution, nature reminds us of its rules in the most brutal way. Selfies in themselves aren't dangerous, but when taken in defiance of instinct, reason, and warning, they can become deadly. In the end, a photo is never worth your life.